Hello and welcome to my channel. This is part 4 of my Sims 3 custom moodlet tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to create an instance class for your moodlet. You can do a variety of things with an instance class. I'm going to attach a VFX to a sim via this moodlet with the help of its instance class. And I'm also going to show you how to add values to a moodlet like a Sims ID. That would also be done via an instance class. So first I'm going to create the instance class. So write public class buff instance tutorial test moodlet. And this inherits from buff instance. Okay, and now create the constructors public instance public buff instance tutorial test moodlet, and we will leave this blank. And then another constructor public buff instance tutorial test moodlet, and in the brackets buff names buff GUID int effect value float timeout count. And this inherits from the base class base buff GUID effect value time count. And now write public override buff instance clone. And return new buff instance tutorial test moodlet, the name of the instance class. And in the brackets m buff comma buff names static GUID m effect value m timeout count. And our instance class is done. And now we are going to create another method in the moodlets class. So write public override buff instance create buff instance, and here return new buff instance tutorial test moodlet, and in the brackets write this comma buff names static GUID comma base dot effect value comma base dot timeout sim minutes. when your moodlet has an instance class, you should make this method in your main moodlet class. So write public visual effect tutorial VFX. Tutorial VFX is an object of visual effect class. And now come to the onAddition method. And here we are going to add the VFX to the sim via this moodlet. So write buff instance tutorial test moodlet obj. So obj is an object of buff instance tutorial test moodlet equals to bi as buff instance tutorial test moodlet. Now in the next line, obj dot tutorial VFX, this is the variable we made in the instance class, equals to visual effect dot create brackets and quotes, and in these quotes we are going to write the name of the VFX. You'll have to search the name in S3PE. There are many visual effects in Sims 3, but only some of them can be used here. The ones I know for sure are the Alien Mind Control VFX, the Sunlight Charm, Ice Blast Charm, and Fairy Dust. But there are a lot of other visual effects too. So I'm going to use the Alien Mind Control VFX. So inside the quotes write EP8 Alien Mesmerize FX. Okay. And now in the next line, obj dot tutorial VFX dot parent to brackets actor comma sim dot fx joints dot, and here write the name of the body part. You can see in the list many body parts are listed. I'm going to put head here. And in the next line, obj dot tutorial VFX dot start. And now come to the onRemoval method, and again we are going to create an object of the instance class. So buff instance tutorial test moodlet object name equals to bi as buff instance tutorial test moodlet. Now we are going to check if tutorial VFX is not null, and if it isn't, then we are going to dispose it. So object name dot tutorial VFX dot dispose. Okay, and now we are going to come to the onTimeout method, and we are going to do the same thing we did with onRemoval. So just copy paste the code from onRemoval to onTimeout. And now again on onRemoval, comment this line out and write brackets bi as buff instance tutorial test moodlet dot dispose bm and do the same for on timeout.
Rabble. Kajem?
Now let's test and see if the visual effect appears.
Was the juice?
And as you can see, the visual effect is appearing. For this test, I made it so the moodlet will get added through this interaction. Okay, and now I'm going to show you how to store a value inside a moodlet. So in my vampire mod, vampires can compel a regular sim to do a variety of things, and I put a restriction on those interactions test condition so that only vampires can use those compel interactions. I have already showed you in my interaction tutorial how you can make those restrictions. But my mod also has a compel to become servant interaction. When a sim becomes a vampire's servant, they don't need to be compelled anymore. They do whatever the vampire asks without any hypnosis needed, since they're already hypnotized. And a hypnotized sim is also immune to compulsion from other vampires. So other vampires cannot command them, so they only obey their master vampire. And adding a restriction like that towards a specific sim is a bit more complex. I added that restriction by storing the master vampire's ID inside the mind control moodlet. And I'm going to show you how I did that. So write public ulong sim desk ID, and sim desk ID is the variable where we will store a sim description ID. So come to the interaction. I'm going to use the same interaction as in the interaction tutorial, but you can make a new one if you want. So first we add the moodlet in this interaction. So write actor.buffmanager.add elements, buff names, and brackets the ID of the moodlet, the GUID. In my case, it is this 0xcb5 number from our moodlet class. And in origin, I'm going to pick from socialization. Okay, and then in the next line, buff tutorial test moodlet, and here we're getting an error, so control click and add the Moodlet's namespace to our project. So we can use it in this namespace as well. So buff tutorial test moodlet dot buff instance tutorial test moodlet obj equals to actor dot buff manager dot get elements and buff names, and again the GUID of our moodlet as buff tutorial test moodlet dot buff instance tutorial test moodlet. So we created an object of the buff instance class, the instance of our moodlet, and this object has the value of the moodlet that our actor sim has. So in the next line write obj dot sim desk id equals to target dot sim description id. So we stored the target's id inside the sim desk id variable inside the moodlet's instance class. In my vampire mod, I store the actor's ID inside the target's moodlet, but I did it the other way around for this tutorial. And now come to the interaction definition class of an interaction, any interaction. So here in the test method, I'm going to show you how you can match whether the target's ID matches or not. So first we are going to check if the actor has the moodlet or not. So write if actor dot buff manager dot has element and then buff names and the buff ID. And then inside the if buff tutorial test moodlet dot buff instance tutorial test moodlet. So we're going to create an object just like we did in the interactions run method equals to actor dot buff manager dot get element and then as buff tutorial test moodlet dot buff instance method class, and in the next line if obj dot sim desk id equals to target dot sim description id return true. So this way we can check if the ID matches. First we are going to check whether the actor has the moodlet or not, and only then we are going to check if the ID matches or not. By learning how to store values inside a moodlet, you can make many different complex moodlets that can function a lot better than most of EA's moodlets. And that concludes this tutorial. This may be the last tutorial for moodlets. There might be one more, but there's a chance that I will make a tutorial on a different topic for the next tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.